Hello and welcome to the Real Women, Real Purpose talk show live in the On Purpose Woman magazine and global community Facebook page. I'm Ginny Robertson, one of the hosts of the Real Women, Real Purpose talk show, where we talk with real women who are living their lives on purpose and bringing their unique gifts to the planet. I'm also the founder and publisher of the On Purpose Woman magazine and founder of the On Purpose Woman global community. My guest today is DE&I Leader and Coach, Jodi Davidson, and we're talking about creating a culture of diversity and inclusion. Thank you for being here with me, Jodi, and educating us on this really important topic.
Well, I'm going to be educating myself as I stand before this group, and we can learn together. How's that?
I like that. I like that a lot. Thank you. I'm really excited to dive into this conversation, but first I want to tell our viewers a little about you. Jodi Davidson is a leadership and life coach who skillfully holds space for clients to gain confidence as they align with their purpose. She serves as vice president of DE&I for Sodexo, a global organization where she develops and deploys inclusion and belonging strategies. Jodi is an active member of the Columbia Center for Spiritual Living in Columbia, Maryland, serving on their board and DE&I Council. She holds a master's degree in HR development and 2 coaching certifications. So Jodi, I read those letters, DE&I, about 3 times. So for those viewers who may not be familiar with this terminology, what is that?
So the letters stand for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And for many years, the E was not as prominent, but the nomenclature has changed for a large proportion of organizations that have wanted to be sure that equity in these times, we can't unsee what has now been seen. Mm-hmm. And so what is ours to do about that? To make a few distinctions, diversity is about acknowledging the unique dimensions that make us who we are. And I think what's really important is that we know that we're not a monolith, right? There's an intersectional group of identities that make us who we are. So we don't want to live in a narrow, like with blinders on kind of way when it comes to those identities. The equity stands for finding a way to remove systemic barriers that get in the way of people having a level playing field. And oftentimes we think about equality, which is about treating everyone the same, being consistent, being fair, being uniform. But the difference between equality and equity is that equity is unearthing, I like that word, to unearth what is it that we need to do to meet the needs of each person. And so it's almost a customized approach rather than a cookie cutter approach. There's a graphic that I'll just describe because I think it's so powerful. And it's 3 people of different heights that are wanting to watch a ball game. And there's a fence that is getting in the way of the shorter person from seeing. So instead of putting a riser for everybody to be able to lift themselves up, it's saying, you know what, the shorter person needs a higher riser in order to be able to reveal what's on the other side. And the invitation, of course, is to remove the barrier altogether. And then inclusion is the place where I think I live and breathe. That's really about creating a sense of belonging where people are affirmed. And we were talking before we went live. Can you share the quote that you had shared with me?
Yes, it's a quote by Verna Myers, and she says that diversity is being invited to the party, and inclusion is being asked to dance. And that just opened up my eyes so much because, what you're talking about too, sounds like the equity was the last piece that we got to in this country, right? We started with diversity where, we want everybody to come in, but everybody who came in didn't necessarily feel like they belonged there. And then once they started to maybe get a greater sense of belonging because of other things that were put into place, there was still not the equity there. So all 3 have to be in place. Is that what you're saying?
There's so much to be said. And, we might proclaim that we want everybody to come in, but when we say that, but it is not showing up as the lived reality that people are experiencing, that can be what is so damaging. So how do we really get to the other place where, there's some research that indicates that diverse groups of people, when they are not cohesive, that can actually lead to lesser productivity. It takes a lot of work to get from that being diminished in some way from a collaboration standpoint to going to the other side, where we can get to the place where there's actual innovation, creativity, higher levels of performance and engagement than what would be deemed as is called not heterogeneous, homogeneous, where everybody looks and behaves the same. That's where we get into the echo chamber, groupthink, and all of those things that we know intellectually are damaging. But we have to really live and breathe and feel in our bones that we really, really want that diversity. And I think when we choose that, that's where the equity and the inclusion and belonging become even possible.
Wow, there's so much to unpack here. And you and I were laughing before we got started. Like, we could be on this call for 3 hours easily and barely touch the surface. But let me ask you first, before we go into anything else, how did you get started in this line of work, in this, what would we call it? This,
vocation.
Vocation.
Right?
Okay.
There you go. So I thought that my whole career was going to be of one that's like a human resources generalist practitioner, moving up an organization chart in that capacity. And in many ways, the work that I get to do is still human resources related, but it's so much more than that, because it's how do we engage from being a good corporate socially responsible citizen. How do we show up in the marketplace? How do we differentiate from a brand standpoint? But back to a little bit about myself. My brother has autism, and my sister is a lesbian, and I have an interfaith marriage, and the list goes on and on. Early when I was graduating high school and trying to figure out at that young age, what the heck was I going to do? I thought that I was going to be a miracle worker, and I got an undergraduate degree in speech pathology. And I realized that was because I wasn't honoring the exact divine human being that my brother who's nonverbal is. But I went down a path of, I want to be in a helping profession. And somehow the clinical environment wasn't the thing that was going to make me feel bright-eyed, like to really bring the passion that was going to cause me to make a difference in the world. I can do that. I was able to, but it wasn't that I was feeling entirely aligned. So somewhere along the way, I decided that human resources was a helping profession that was going to allow me to be in a helping profession, but more in the business world. Mm-hmm. And what was interesting was I started being very supportive of employees and maybe skewing my focus towards everything was about the employee. And I learned that human resources really also very much balanced about protecting the business. And I swung the pendulum and started focusing on the business and not as much about the people. And somewhere along the way, I think I struck a sweet spot. Right around that time, almost 20 years ago, there was a fairly significant class action lawsuit that Sodexo encountered due to the failure to promote African Americans proportionately with their demographic. It's called availability. And the learning, the lesson learned was that we didn't have the systems, we didn't have the processes in place that would allow us to defend that. That wasn't true. So what was amazing was, first of all, I had the opportunity to step into this DE&I work. It was called diversity, and as you say, diversity and inclusion, and now diversity, equity, and inclusion. But it was an opportunity for me to I felt make a difference, that it was really going to allow me to step into something that was going to be legacy creating for myself. I never anticipated that I was going to be in this type of work for as long as I have, and it just keeps expanding and growing. And I'll be honest with you, a lot of the work that we're doing now is back to basics, that you get to a certain place, organizations need to become a little bit more humble, leaders evolve and change, and then we take a look and say, we're a generation in, and it's time for us to get back to what the foundational aspects were that helped us to change the trajectory in the first place. I think I just rambled a bunch, but that's okay.
No, it makes perfect sense. So I understand, I think on a deeper, wider level, what your role is there, and that it's fluid. It's extremely fluid, right? And the company, I think organizations have to also be committed to fluidity, if you will, to change and go back to basics if need be, and not get stuck in, we're doing it the right way now, because we know that tomorrow is going to present another opportunity.
I do think it's important to make the distinction that I am not a chief diversity officer. The work that I get to do is about affirming and helping people to up level. And that's all people with a focus on specific target audiences.
Okay.
Make sure that there's access and a sense of nurturing. A lot of the work is about teaching people to become allies. Some of the work that I do is about embedding diversity, equity, and inclusion into other processes, because if DE&I is something out there or over there and it's not baked in, then it's not really sustainable. That's when it becomes what's called performative, which is that we're doing it for optics rather than because we're really recognizing that it's a moral obligation for us to go deeply and live and breathe DE&I rather than it being a standalone.
Oh, I love hearing that. That makes such sense. Thank you. You're also on the DE&I Council at the Columbia Center for Spiritual Living in Columbia, Maryland. They're one of our advertisers in the magazine, so go look them up. What is that about, and why was that council formed?
Yeah, so science of mind is a practice, a philosophy that's really about recognizing that there is the divine, that is the master creator or source or whatever we choose to call that great thing. And within each of us, because if the divine created us, then we are divine. And so how do we know that truth deeply, not just in this out there kind of ethereal sense, but deep in our own bones as spiritual beings in a human being or human body, and that we can really recognize that, leaning into being grateful for all of who we are and all of creation. So I'm sure there's a more eloquent way of explaining science of mind. That's just my novice way of explaining it, because I'm only 4 years into the practice.
Okay.
I celebrate Dr. Nadine Rogers, who is our interim minister, who recognized that we need to do some work right in our center around DE&I. So she invited a group of us, and really whoever is a member that would want to become part of the council, to fully engage. And I think this is the best way to articulate it, that our mission is to illuminate the spiritual truth that we all belong to one another. And if we can just have that deep knowing, and one thing that I would want to say about that is I reflect on what I was sharing about my wonderful workplace where I've been for 25 years and the work that I do with Columbia CSL. It's not very different, but it's a lot different. So the fact that I get to bring my spirituality into my work environment, and I've done that carefully. You can't be going down a path that would not allow people to feel that their sincerely held beliefs are just as valid. But for us to know that for us to be able to bring our whole selves to work, especially in these times when we're in the middle of still a pandemic, and we are experiencing social unrest in the United States and all over the world, right? And so our groundedness, our spirituality can be one of those things that allows us to truly contribute, because that brings us energy, love, and joy, And with Columbia Center for Spiritual Living, I like to think that my corporate lens is something that is beneficial as we're working to make the world a better place. That sounds idealistic, and maybe it is, and so it is.
It is idealistic. That's why I love it.
And I will tell you that there are times that I bring that corporate lens a little bit too much. And I can tell that that's not resonating for what is a volunteer organization, right? And how does this council come together to find common interests in advancing inclusion and belonging? And it may be that we come from different perspectives. That's what diversity is. So if I choose to do some work around, let's say, I'll share with you on Wednesday evening, there's a panel discussion with a group of us, and it's predominantly around LGBTQIA plus inclusion. And we also have an individual who's a cisgender African-American who's sharing her story. Some of you might know of Tracy Brown. Another person who's joining us is Gina Duncan, who works for Equality Florida. And Gina's a trans woman. And then we have Reverend Rafe and Reverend Rafe Ellis and Deborah Ellis, who are going to be joining us as well. So I share that if you want to go deeper in more of a panel discussion, I would be honored to have folks to join us for that as well.
Where can they get information on that?
columbiacsl.com/events is a great place to find that information. I just want us to know together that if we meet each other where we are and take a deep breath and be intentional about the work and know that it's not easy. And so sometimes we're going to be at odds with each other. The beauty of that is that instead of being in this echo chamber or cancel culture, where we're going to say, I don't agree with you, so you suck, or you're a bad person, that brings us to a place of binary mentality that for me to be right, you need to be wrong. And I don't think we could be further from the truth. How do we be respectful and honor those differences? That's what is that's the divine. That's it right there.
Yeah. Well, Science of Mind has been my go-to spiritual teaching for over 30 years. And I love the mission of the Centers for Spiritual Living, which is creating a world that works for everyone. So I can see how that is sprinkled through everything that they're attempting to do, as far as moving forward and trying new things. And I love what you're talking about. I get very excited about that and a bit overwhelmed sometimes because, it's that, where's my little piece? In fact, I got really clear a few years ago that there are things that are mine to do and things that clearly aren't. And so that's been a mantra I've been using for myself when I ask a question, what is mine to do in this? And I want to do something. It's not an excuse to do nothing, but yet that's somebody else's to do. And if I'm out there doing it, they don't get to do it. And I may not be doing it as well as it can be done. So
I'm working on boundaries right now.
Yeah.
So as you're describing that, and when you think about what is yours to do, what is that?
I think I've got a platform. I created this, on purpose woman global community 22 years ago. And it was important to me to have diversity in the very beginning, but I didn't use those words. I didn't know words like inclusion or equity. All I knew is I'd had a sense of what could happen when women came together. And I wanted to bring together a lot of women who didn't all look like me or sound like me or talk like me or have the same interests. I wanted diversity, but I didn't have a name for it. And I remember getting a little frustrated early on because the women who were showing up were pretty white and pretty straight. And I said to an African-American friend of mine, a woman, I said, why aren't they coming? Why aren't Black women showing up? And she goes, just keep doing what you're doing. Just be consistent. People will get it, or it's not going to be for everybody. And I know that's true. That took me a while to learn that. I don't care what color, what kind of woman you are. I'm not for everybody. And so, but her words that just said, just keep doing what you're doing. And people will pay attention or not. And the right people will show up. And that has just really panned out for me over the years. And so I think mine to do is to create a platform and a space for women to show up and be who they are.
And, there's something to be said about the outreach and finding a way to connect with individuals who may not be the traditional audience, right?
Mm-hmm.
Something that may be useful to know at Sodexo, we have a number of employee resource groups. And these are groups that are based on identity and an encouragement for allies to get involved. And to learn how to become allies because of the professional development and the perspective that those groups bring. I will tell you that Black women are choosing to more often join the African American Leadership Forum as compared to Sew Together, which is our gender network. And I recently asked somebody, why is that? And she said, I know that the ALF group, the African American Leadership Forum, I won't have to explain myself. And I care deeply also about Sew Together, but when I go there, I know that I'm going to be on. I know that I'm going to have to educate. And so that's something that we have to know, that some individuals want to educate, and they do so with a generous spirit. And then there are others that are very fatigued, and to honor that they, we might, as I'll say we, because they is othering, right? So don't we all want respite in these times? And how can we create the space for people to be in that relaxation? And I like to think maybe there are small group ministries even, where under the umbrella of your platform, is there perhaps something that's on purpose about women of color or something along those lines? And this is just coming out.
No,
And I don't know what I'm saying, but I'm saying it. So
no, I appreciate that. And I'm so glad you brought that up, because I guess it was probably 5 or 6 years ago, maybe 6 or 7 years ago, when I first started hearing that on certain sites I went on, or groups that I went on, and where a Black woman would say, I am so tired. This is exhausting. Go educate yourself. Not to me specifically, but I'm sitting there going, ooh. My first thought was that was harsh, because I thought, if how do I educate myself? And I don't even know where to start. But I started to notice and really, I guess, internalize that that's not anyone's job but mine to educate myself. Then I can show up and be vulnerable and be uneducated and ask questions, and those who are willing to help will help. But I think exhaustion was the word I saw being used a lot. They were just tired. They were tired of carrying all this on their shoulders. And so I'm so glad you brought that up, because I think it's such an important point.
Absolutely. It's also coming to mind that there are occasions we don't want to be shy to say, I am here for you. Maybe we're not as woke as we could be because we're in the middle of the learning process. But if there are events that happen in society and we don't reach out to our sisters of color and ask, how are you doing? I don't know how I can make things right. But what I do know is that I care deeply about you, and hold that space just for individuals to know that we're not alone. There's a shared humanity. And by the way, I love you.
Yeah.
And that's sometimes that's enough. Or when we ask people, how are you doing? And they are harsh. Well, this is coming from an empath who has been working on being highly sensitive to the point of taking things personally over the years. I don't want to take things so personally anymore. But if somebody comes off a certain way, maybe I don't need to, it's not about me, right?
Maybe it isn't. Figure, right? I'm not always the center of that universe, am I? Or any universe.
I had a coach, Coach Betty. She's no longer here on this physical realm, but she said, Jodi, you remind me of my daughter. It is not all about you. And that was probably 15 years ago that Betty was my coach. And I remember so vividly her saying that to me because it's true.
Yeah. I can remember someone important saying that to me a number of years ago when I was taking everything personally that was coming my way. And she goes, did you ever stop to think that maybe they weren't even thinking of you when they said or did that? And I'm like, no, really? But it was just, it is easy when you're sensitive and empathic and all of that to take on the energy and to then reframe it and make up stories about it. Because I was a master story maker upper, if you will.
You know, I was reflecting on some of the questions that we were going to exchange about today, and I came upon something that I'd worked on. It was really about burnout several months ago, and I saw this little graphic that says, energy flows where attention goes. And so if we are over-analyzing a thing that happened in passing, and that other person is off doing whatever it is they're doing, and we're still like obsessing about what did they say? What did I say? Gosh, if only I forgot to do blah, blah, blah. What if instead of using all of that power, that energy within ourselves that is being wasted, and instead repurpose that to do the good work that we're talking about here? It would just make so much more sense.
It does, doesn't it? It requires a certain level of maturity and spiritual growth, doesn't it? It's an ongoing process.
You know, when I was at Georgetown 11 years ago, 12 years ago, it was like one of the best experiences of my life when I was pursuing my leadership coaching through Georgetown. And I was like, where am I going with this? So one of the things that we learned about was adult development stages. So oftentimes in psychology, we're looking at child development, but somewhere along the line, we often forget to look at the adult development stages. So we're coming from a place of initially harmony and how are we getting along with each other? And then we're moving into being an achiever. And I think sometimes that's where the ego gets in the way. And we move into our subject matter expertise. When people say, well, you should have more executive presence, oftentimes it's about what's called gravitas, that we're deep-seated in our knowledge and expertise. Executive presence is a lot of other things, our appearance, the way we communicate, our style, etc. But what I learned was that we have what's called post-conventional development. And that's where we're recognizing that we are one small piece of something so much greater. And it's allowing us, when we know this, to become more visionary and to become more strategic in the work that we get to do, because it's not where we're looking at how is this thing going to affect me. Rather, it's how can I positively impact the world. And then as the world changes, so do we, right?
Yeah, beautifully. I want to go back just a minute to what you were saying about reaching out to our friends and people in our lives when world events happen that we know, even if it doesn't directly happen to them, that it affects them emotionally and can cause trauma, can cause re-traumatized, whatever that term is. But what I thought of as you were talking, I'd never looked at it quite that way before. It reminded me of how we may be kind of hesitant to reach out to someone who's grieving a loss because we don't have the right words to say, or we don't want to make it worse. And I think it's the same thing, isn't it? We don't want to say, so we say nothing, which leaves this big kind of hole of nothingness.
I've talked with enough colleagues to know that that feels really demoralizing. It is an indication of that we're not expressing that we care about that individual because of all this I guess it's ancestral trauma that occurs, and we receive some of that in our own bodies by way of being born to our parents who are born to their parents and so on and so forth. And so that trauma is not only from the past or that it didn't directly happen to them. It belongs squarely with them.
Mhm.
And if we don't pause and demonstrate that what we care about is them as the human being that they are, human to human, it really is damaging. So I want to give ourselves permission. It's like, yeah, I might screw up. I'm going to darn sight try though. And I can tell you that for me, it's made a heck of a lot of difference in other people's lives that I've done that. And it doesn't take a lot to do it. It takes time. What does it really take to pick up the phone or to text somebody? It's again, it goes back to the energy aspect of it, I think.
And it goes back to, that's never about me, but I'm making it about me and my discomfort and my fears. And, what is the worst thing that can happen? If I mess up, maybe they'll tell me later.
Yeah.
Or maybe it doesn't matter to them, but yeah, so take ourselves out of it.
And so decentering. So because I've over the years been dabbling in all kinds of mindfulness practices, I was more used to the word centering, which is let's get really grounded and let's be with ourselves. Let's notice what we notice. Let's allow the thoughts to flow. Let's not get energy stuck in our body. So when somebody used a couple of years ago, the word decentering, that it was the first time I had heard it. I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm into centering. And I was like, no, Jodi, get out of your own self. Decentering is where you're focused instead on the individuals that are surrounding us.
I've not heard that before either, but I like it. It makes it so simple.
Yeah.
Really is a very simple term. What would you say, since a lot of our viewers are entrepreneurs, entrepreneurial women, what would you say to a woman entrepreneur who doesn't have a large staff or maybe any staff, who isn't looking to shift things within the organizational structure, and she wants to make sure that the world knows that she is open, she wants that diversity and she wants to be inclusive? What are maybe a couple of simple things that we may not think about that either show that we're not open? I hope I'm not putting you on the spot here because this isn't something I told you I was going to ask you.
No, well, actually, you did mention.
Okay.
When we were talking earlier,
but I said it a little bit differently. So good.
You talked about the optics, right?
Yes. Yes.
Are we not conscious of the messages that we're putting out based on graphics. Do we have diversity in the mix? And that includes people of color, people of different abilities, not only people in wheelchairs, right? People who maybe are out in a way that demonstrates that they might be trans, as an example. The list goes on. Can we be bold in those visuals? But that's only performative if it is performative if we don't take additional actions. And I think one of the easiest things that we can do is look up and be on purpose. I love your on purpose, don't I? Around supplier diversity, and find minority women business enterprises and focus on your purchasing power. And I think that that's one of the things, along with, let me just add one more, I think mentoring, seeking out people who are different from ourselves. One of the programs I intend to be launching in the near term here at Sodexo is called Alliance with a Y, ALLYANCE. And it's a reciprocal mentoring program where individuals will be connecting across difference. The mentors are learning about how to be an ally because of their gaining insights. What is it like to walk in your shoes? Having empathy and compassion, which the compassion is more about the action that we take, whereas the empathy is more about the ability to walk in a person's shoes. So I thought about the other day that compassion is emotion, empathy in motion. And I think that building our future talent, so it could be hiring an intern who is from an underrepresented group. It could be mentoring somebody at a historically Black college and university, HBCU. It could be nurturing a young person who you happen to have met, crossed paths with, and doing the outreach so that you're connecting and demonstrating that you care and that you're willing to provide insights that will help them to see a path in themselves, because we live either up to or down to perceived potential. And sometimes people don't recognize the potential in themselves, right? So how do we help them to see it in themselves? To know that they're whole and good as they are. All right.
That's good. That's good. So, wow. I think we've talked about a lot of things I want to talk about, but not in the order, or they would just flowed really well. But I think maybe the other thing I want to bring up is you talk about engaging with intentionality. Can you say more about that and how we might set our intentions so that we do, and what does that perception, what is that perception, do you think, when we are engaging with intention?
Yeah, so I think about even your magazine, right? So On Purpose Women Magazine, and I'm looking at over here because I wrote something down that I think in your Facebook group about your magazine, you were talking about wisdom, inspiration, ideas, and resources. And so if we think about those things and tie those to intentionality, I like to think about it in this way, that we define what it is that it is ours to do, what we set out to manifest, right? So that's where we're defining our intention. And then it's about aligning that intention that we have thought about in our mind's eye. But then in our habits, our words, and our deeds, are we showing up in a way that is really bringing that to the forefront? And it's aligned with who we are as a human being, spiritual being in a human form. And then we can define, align, and then refine. So we're changing, things evolve. I can tell you that for a period of time, I got stuck because I was going rote and doing the same thing over and over again. And I needed to up level myself. So I went back to being a student rather than, remember, we talked about the achiever expert type. Well, I was there and I decided I was, I think, ready to step my toe over into that post-conventional space that I was describing to you. And so that meant that what I was doing, it's not that it was bad, but I needed to evolve, change, and grow. So the cycle of define, align, refine happens, and then it happens again, and it happens again. And I think that it's not sequential. I think sometimes these things happen in a concurrent fashion. So what does that mean when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion? We can't, as my wonderful boss, Tony Tenicella, says, that we cannot boil the ocean. I love that. And so to pick those 2 or 3 or 4 things that we're going to do and to do them well and to measure them and to be clear on the objective that we set forth and then to recalibrate and then to go at it from perhaps a different angle. Or if something didn't work, instead of blaming and shaming ourselves, to know that this is an experiment that's part of the life that we're living. And then we try again. And to, when did we make it not okay to make a mistake?
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
And that's where, I imagine that we're getting to a point where it's already 45 minutes we've been chatting. I think it's important that we talk about psychological safety, which is where we're creating this space where individuals can feel that they don't have to be perfect, that they can ask questions, that there's the ability to take risks. And Google actually did a study where psychological safety is the #1 factor that leads to effective teams because of the ability to collaborate with one another. So I think that it's really important that we create that psychological safety, which some might say there's no such thing as truly being safe, but I would proclaim that the safe space comes from when we show up as our true authentic selves and we let people know that they can do the same thing. Whereas brave space is where we can be in compassionate opposition with one another and not be scared about doing that.
I love that, compassionate opposition. You're just full of great stuff today, Jodi. I love you're using things that I've never heard used the way you're using them, words that are important. And so I thank you for that. Did I interrupt? Did you finish that thought? Or
No, I was going to say, I know I've been talking a whole lot, and I want to tell you, Ginny, that some of what you have brought forward is wonderful. It's, like we're doing, remember that dance that you were talking about, the inclusion where we're invited to dance. I feel like we're dancing with one another, and I'm learning from you with your on purpose way of being in the world. Just like I appreciate that you maybe have learned a few things from me today as well.
I certainly have, and thank you for that. And yes, and I think it's important for our viewers to know that it's okay to not know. It's just okay. It's knowing that we don't know and pretending that we do that can cause harm.
I agree.
Or just being silent can cause harm. So if any of this is important to you, please, Jodi, where can people get more information on this topic? I mean, there's a zillion books I know that people can read, but do you have anything specific that somebody just starting out and wanting to educate themselves a little bit more about diversity and inclusion and equity might go?
There's so many resources. One is not in particular coming to mind, but I will say that if anybody wants to reach out to me, that I could, find out more specifically, as a good consultant does, what is it that you really want to know? Because the topic is so broad. Okay. And then from there come to a place of what's the right solution or resource. So I can give my email address as Jodi Dave 829 at yahoo.com. JODIDAV 829 at
And I'll
yahoo.
also I'll put that in the comments as well, so they don't have to go back and find that again. So, final words of wisdom from you. It could be something you've already told us, but what do you want to leave us with that you think is really, really important?
If we cover what we deem to be the stigmatized pieces of who we are, that's damaging to ourselves and others. So to create the space where there's an invitation for people to show up, all of it, the good, the bad, the ugly, just bring it all. Let's just be together and create that space where we just truly value and love each other. And I know that might be a little bit ethereal, depending on who's in the audience. And you know what? I'm okay with that.
Yeah, right. Because it's an amazing, what may appear to be lofty kind of goal, but it's doable. It's doable. So thank you, Jodi, for being with me and sharing not just your expertise, but your passion for this work and the difference that you're making out there in so many ways. And I'm sure you just are a walking example of how we be and how we shift and change and grow and mess up. And I think we all need permission to be messy, to just show up messy. Because if we're all being messy, it could be really beautiful.
You know what? Let's think about finger painting.
Yes.
And how messy and fun and wonderful that is.
Yes. So thank you again for being with me today and sharing such just amazing information. I'm going to have to go back and watch this again and take some notes. So thank you again.
Thank you.
I want to thank all of you for joining us for the Real Women, Real Purpose talk show live in the On Purpose Women magazine and Global Community Facebook page. If you love this interview and want to share it with your friends, it will be on our YouTube channel in the next 48 hours. So go over to the On Purpose Woman Global Community on YouTube, subscribe, and sign up for notifications if you don't want to miss any of our interviews. Right now, there are over 120 inspiring, informative, and fun shows for you to watch on our channel. And in May, we started sharing videos of the speakers at our On Purpose Woman Global Community Zoom gatherings, so even more added value there. We have 3 more shows for you this week. On Tuesday, tomorrow, July 26th, Catherine Yarborough, the other host of the Real Women, Real Purpose talk show, will speak with Olivia Jones about Be Uniquely You, Inside and Out. On Wednesday, July 28th, Catherine will interview Shelley O'Connell about Fun with Flirting. And on Thursday, July 29th, I'll talk with Lauren Thomas about connecting in today's world. We'll also have 8 fabulous interviews lined up in August. You can always find out what's coming up on the Real Women, Real Purpose talk show by going to my website, opwgc.com, and clicking on the On Purpose Woman magazine. Look for the spread in the table of contents. And while you're there, check out the On Purpose Woman Global Community. Thank you again for watching the Real Women, Real Purpose talk show.